The sky cracked open like a judge's gavel, unleashing a torrent that turned the dusty roads of western Spain into rivers of mud, and I, Finley Harper, cursed every poor life choice that had led me here, chasing ghosts across the Atlantic on a whim. My backpack, heavy with regrets heavier than its contents, dragged at my shoulders as lightning forked the horizon, illuminating the jagged outline of olive groves that blurred into the chaos. That's when her voice pierced the roar, a soft, steady call like a lighthouse in the gale. "Hey! Over here, get out of that before you drown." I stumbled toward the glow, a weathered stone cottage huddled against the storm's rage, its tiled roof slick and gleaming under the assault. She stood in the open doorway, silhouetted against the warm flicker of a hearth fire, her auburn hair catching the light like embers. Water streamed from my clothes as I crossed the threshold, and she handed me a threadbare towel without a word, her blue eyes holding mine just long enough to make the world tilt. "I'm Arya," she said finally, a faint American lilt threading through her words, like she'd carried it across oceans too. "And you're soaked through. Sit before you catch your death." I collapsed onto a worn armchair by the fire, the heat seeping into my bones like a reluctant forgiveness, while she busied herself in the tiny kitchen alcove, the storm outside battering the walls like an uninvited guest. The cottage smelled of sage and old books, a sanctuary carved from the wild Andalusian hills near Huelva, where the Atlantic winds whispered secrets to the pines. I'd come to Spain on a sabbatical from my dead-end graphic design gig in Seattle, 30 days to find myself, as my therapist had smugly prescribed after my last breakup imploded in a haze of accusations and slammed doors. But finding myself felt a lot like getting lost, especially when the weather turned biblical and my rented Fiat's GPS led me straight into this backwoods deluge. Arya returned with 2 mugs of something steaming, chamomile tea laced with honey, she explained, the kind her grandmother swore could mend a shattered soul. She was younger than me, mid-20s maybe, with a lithe grace that spoke of yoga mats and midnight sketches rather than the corporate grind I knew too well. Her hair fell in loose waves, framing a face dotted with faint freckles across the bridge of her nose, and she wore a simple sundress that had seen better days, faded floral patterns clinging to her like memories. "You look like you've been wrestling the devil himself," she said, settling onto the rug across from me, knees drawn up, chin resting on them. Her eyes, those clear, stormy blues, held no judgment, only a quiet curiosity that made my chest ache in a way I hadn't felt since college fumers and half-remembered kisses. I laughed, a rusty sound that surprised us both. "Close enough. Name's Finley. I'm wandering. Or running. Pick your poison." The words tumbled out unbidden, fueled by the adrenaline crash and the way the firelight danced in her gaze. We talked then, as strangers do when the world conspires to strip them bare. She was from Portland, Oregon, another rain-soaked soul who'd traded evergreens for cork oaks 2 years back, chasing a dream of painting the light that slanted across the Iberian plains. Her canvases lined the walls, bold strokes of ochre and azure capturing the raw pulse of sunsets over the Odial marshes, places where flamingos waited in pink defiance against the tide. But beneath the artist's poise, there was a fracture, hints of a family back home that viewed her phase of living abroad as just that, a phase to outgrow, complete with a meddling mother who forwarded engagement announcements from eligible sons like chain letters from hell. As the thunder rolled into a distant grumble, our stories wove together like vines overtaking a trellis. I confessed my string of failed relationships, women who came and went like Seattle's fog, leaving me convinced love was just a pretty lie we told ourselves to stave off the dark. There was Lena, the barista with tattoos like war paint, who ghosted me after I dared to ask for more than stolen mornings. Then Sarah, the lawyer whose ambition swallowed us whole, ending in a courtroom of words where I was the defendant for wanting softness in a world of sharp edges. Arya listened, her fingers tracing patterns in the rug, and when she spoke of her own heart skirmishes, a high school sweetheart who fled when labels got too real, a college fling that fizzled under parental scrutiny, her voice cracked just enough to mirror my own hidden scars. By midnight, the storm had softened to a patter on the roof, and we'd migrated to the tiny porch, wrapped in a shared blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. The air was electric, charged not just by the weather but by the proximity of her, the way her laugh bubbled up like a spring, or how her hand brushed mine when passing the tea, sending sparks up my arm. You know, she murmured, tilting her head to catch the stars peeking through the clouds, Spain has this way of making strangers feel like they've always known each other. Like the land remembers. I wanted to kiss her then, to bridge the gap with something reckless and true, but fear clamped down, a familiar vice, whispering that I'd ruin it, that I'd always ruin it. Instead, I leaned back, letting the moment stretch. Maybe it's not the land, I said softly. Maybe it's you. She turned, her eyes searching mine, and for a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then she smiled, slow and knowing, and leaned her head on my shoulder. We stayed like that until dawn crept in, painting the hills gold, and I wondered if this was what home felt like, not a place, but a person who saw your jagged edges and stayed anyway. The next morning, the sun baked the earth dry as if the storm had been a fever dream, and Arya insisted on driving me to the nearest village in her battered VW Beetle, top down to let the wind whip through us like freedom. Huelva's markets buzzed with life, vendors hawking jamon and olives, the air thick with the sizzle of churros and the trill of street musicians strumming flamenco riffs. She bought me a woven basket of figs, their purple skin splitting under my thumb like secrets begging to be tasted, and we wandered the labyrinthine streets, her hand occasionally grazing mine in the crowd, each touch a quiet ignition. By afternoon, we'd gravitated to her studio, a sun-drenched loft above a tapas bar where the scent of garlic and saffron mingled with turpentine. Canvases leaned against every surface, half-finished dreams in oil and charcoal, a woman's silhouette against a crashing wave, evoking longing, a cluster of wild poppies bending in the breeze, symbols of fragile resilience. Arya moved with purpose, dipping brushes into jars of cobalt and sienna, but her eyes kept flicking to me, as if I were the subject she couldn't quite capture. "Sit for me?" she asked, half joking, but there was a vulnerability in it, a plea wrapped in paint. I perched on a stool by the window, the light slanting across my face like a spotlight, and she worked in silence at first, her strokes bold and sure. But as the hours melted, words flowed again, deeper this time, delving into the marrow of our fears. She spoke of her father's quiet disapproval, the letters from home laced with concern that cut deeper than anger, how she'd fled to Spain to breathe without the weight of expectations. I shared the ache of my mother's passing 5 years back, how it left me adrift, building walls around my heart because losing more felt unbearable. "Love's a risk," I admitted, watching her mix a shade of green that matched the hills outside. "But so's breathing, I guess." She set down her brush then, crossing the room in 3 strides, and cupped my face in hand streaked with cerulean. Her kiss was tentative at first, a question posed in the press of lips, tasting of figs and possibility. When I kissed her back, it deepened into something fervent, a dam breaking after years of drought, hands in hair, breaths mingling, the world narrowing to the heat between us. We pulled apart gasping, foreheads touching, and she whispered, "Stay. Just for tonight." I did, and the nights blurred into a week, then 2, as I extended my visa in my mind and reality bent to accommodate. We explored the coast together, cliffs plunging into the Atlantic at Punta Umbria, where we'd picnic on manchego and wine, her head in my lap as I read aloud from dog-eared copies of Whitman, his verses echoing the wildness in her eyes. Evenings found us in hidden coves, toes buried in sand, sharing dreams under stars that seemed closer here, unpolluted by city lights. Arya's touch grew bolder, fingers interlacing during walks, a stolen kiss behind a market stall, but it was the quiet intimacies that undid me, the way she'd hum old folk tunes while cooking paella, or trace the scars on my knuckles from a childhood fall, calling them stories etched in skin. Yet, beneath the idol, shadows stirred. My phone buzzed with emails from Seattle, bills piling up, a job offer I hadn't sought, reminders that my life waited like a half-packed suitcase. Arya's, too, fractured at the edges, a video call from her sister, voice tinny with worry, hinting at a family gathering back home that felt like a summons. "They don't get it, Finn," she confessed one night, curled against me on her narrow bed, the ceiling fan stirring the humid air. "They think this, us, is temporary. Like I'm playing house until I come to my senses." I held her tighter, my heart a drumbeat of defiance. "Then let them think it. We're real. This is real. But doubt gnawed at me in the dark hours, when sleep evaded and the sea's roar sounded like warnings. Was I just another phase for her, a romantic detour before reality reclaimed us? Or was she the anchor I'd been sailing from all along? It was on the third week, under a sky bruised with the promise of another storm, that the fracture widened. We'd driven inland to the Sierra de Aracena, chasing wild mushrooms and the myth of a hidden waterfall locals whispered about. The path was treacherous, rocky trails slick with dew, pines whispering overhead, but her laughter pulled me on, a siren's call. We found it at last, a cascade tumbling into a crystalline pool, mist rising like spirits. Stripping to swimsuits, we plunged in, the cold shock stealing our breaths, emerging sputtering and alive. Floating there, bodies close in the chill embrace, she turned to me with eyes like sapphires. "I love you, Finley," she said, the words simple as a vow, profound as thunder. My response caught in my throat, love, too raw, too soon, a word I'd armored against. Instead, I kissed her fiercely, pouring what I couldn't say into the salt of our skin. But as we dressed, my phone vibrated insistently, a Seattle number I hadn't blocked, my ex, Lena, her voice a ghost in the static. "Finn, I was wrong. Come back. We can fix this." I silenced it, but the damage rippled. Arya saw the flicker in my face, the hesitation. "Who was that?" she asked, voice light but laced with steel. "No one," I lied, the coward's shield. But lies have weight, and this one settled heavy between us as we drove back in silence, the radio's flamenco croon mocking our unraveling. That night, betrayal bloomed not from malice, but from the fragility of trust. Arya disappeared into her studio after dinner, claiming a deadline for a gallery show in Seville, but I found her later, phone in hand, tears carving tracks down her cheeks. The screen glowed with an email, from her mother, forwarded with love, photos of a family friend's son, a doctor in Portland, perfect for her, accompanied by a plane ticket home for Christmas, to discuss your future. She hadn't told me about the ticket. "I was going to," she sobbed when I confronted her, my voice sharper than intended. "But your secrets, that call today. How can I trust this if you're still tethered to ghosts?" Words flew like shrapnel, my accusations of her wavering loyalty, her retorts about my emotional walls, how I pulled away at the first whisper of love. The fight escalated, voices echoing off the cottage walls, until she hurled a sketchbook at my feet, pages filled with my likeness, tender and fierce. "This is what I see in you. But you won't let me in." I stormed out into the gathering dusk, the air thick with the metallic tang of impending rain, my heart a storm of its own. Wandering the olive groves, branches clawing at my jacket, I replayed it all, the shelter she'd offered, the nights that healed old wounds, the love I'd been too afraid to claim. Hours later, soaked and shivering, I returned to find the cottage dark, her VW gone. A note on the table, "I need space to breathe. Don't follow. Arya." The days that followed were a descent into the Andalusian haze, me haunting the markets of Huelva, nursing café con leches that tasted like ash, sketching half-hearted designs on napkins while the sea mocked my solitude. Friends back home texted platitudes, "Time heals," but time felt like quicksand, pulling me under. I drove the coast road to Mazagon, where dunes met the Atlantic in endless sighs, and there, in a beachside bar strung with fairy lights, I saw her again. Not in flesh, but in a flyer for her Seville show, Arya Voss, Echoes of the Tide, opening in 2 days. Seville called like a reckoning, the city of orange blossoms and Moorish arches, where the Guadalquivir wound through history's veins. I bought a ticket on impulse, the high-speed train from Huelva blurring the landscape into a watercolor of regret. The gallery was tucked in the Barrio Santa Cruz, a labyrinth of whitewashed alleys perfumed with jasmine, and as I slipped inside amid the murmur of critics and collectors, my pulse thrummed like a war drum. Her work dominated the space, massive canvases pulsing with emotion, waves crashing against figures locked in embrace or fracture, colors bleeding into one another like unresolved longing. And there, in the corner piece, the one that stopped me cold, was us. A woman with my green eyes, athletic poise, reaching for another with auburn waves and blue depths, their hands inches apart across a stormy sea, lightning fracturing the sky. The title, Shelter in the Tempest. She stood beside it, elegant in a black dress that hugged her frame, chatting with a silver-haired patron, but her eyes found mine across the room, widening in shock. The crowd faded as she excused herself, weaving toward me, her steps measured but urgent. Finley, she breathed, voice a mix of fury and ache. What are you doing here? I saw the flyer. I couldn't not come. The words hung, inadequate, as thunder rumbled outside, another storm, as if the heavens conspired for drama. We stepped into the alley behind the gallery, the narrow passage lit by a single lantern, rain beginning to spit from low clouds. I'm sorry, I said, the dam breaking. For the walls, the lies, the fear. You offered me shelter that night, and I built a prison instead. I love you, Arya. Terrifyingly, completely. Tears welled in her eyes, mingling with the first fat drops of rain. I sent that ticket home because I was scared too, of losing you, of this being a dream that evaporates. But I chose to stay, to fight for us. And you. You ran. We stood inches apart, the downpour intensifying, soaking us through as it had that first night. My hand extended, trembling, and she stared at it, the air electric with possibility and pain. I'm not running now, I whispered. Not from you. For a moment, the world balanced on a knife's edge, betrayal's echo, love's fragile bridge. Then, with a sob that tore from her depths, she closed the gap, her hand clasping mine, pulling me into an embrace that defied the storm. We held on as lightning cracked overhead, not kissing, not yet, but anchoring each other against the gale. The rain washed away the salt of our wounds, and in that raw, drenched vulnerability, forgiveness took root, not perfect, but human, resilient as the olive trees that bent but never broke. Back in the gallery, dripping and unapologetic, we faced the whispers together, her arm linked through mine as she introduced me, my muse. My heart. The show closed late, champagne flowing like absolution, and we drove back to Huelva under clearing skies, the radio tuned to a ballad of lost lovers reunited. In the cottage, we talked until dawn, not of futures carved in stone, but of steps, therapy calls across time zones, visits to Portland's rain to face her family, my return to Seattle only to pack for a life less tethered. Months later, as autumn gilded the groves, Arya and I stood on that same porch, her easel open to a new canvas, two figures, hands entwined, walking into a sunlit horizon. Spain had been our tempest, our shelter, but home was wherever we chose to build it, brick by loving brick. Love, I learned, wasn't the absence of storms, but the courage to dance in them, together.